So you all know this is being videotaped. So whoever can't make it, or if you guys want to look at it later, it'll be on our city website, it'll be on Facebook, and you shouldn't have a hard time finding it. City of Torrance sent someone we didn't even know, so they've got their own video crew here. So there's a lot of interest in what's going on here. And we've got some question cards going around, so feel free to write your questions down and get them to the ladies that are going around collecting them. And then towards the end of the presentation, or at the end, we'll have a little panel discussion and answer some of your questions. And with that, I want to welcome you to the first Mayor's Summit on repurposing the AES power plant site in Redondo Beach, as well as the Edison power line corridor. This is a big deal. Tonight's kind of the beginning of an education process and explaining what's at stake and how we can best look at it and move forward, because it's going to require a public vote, and the more educated the residents are, the better choices they're going to make. So the plant is coming down. It's due to retire. And the power lines are eventually going to come down. That was supposed to be all together, but I guess they're each worth their own applause. So it's been a long, uncertain, difficult road, and as many of you I see out there know, I've been working on this for probably 17 years. This all isn't going to happen soon, but it is going to happen. So welcome, as I said, to the first summit. Here's our favorite power plant. There's been a series of these at this site for over 100 years. And if you look closely at it, you see there's actually 3 power plants here. The one on the left was built in the 40s, the one in the center was built in the 50s, and the one all the way to the right was built in the 60s. So we don't only have one power plant to demolish and remediate, we have 3. And the plant this particular plant is permanently retiring at the end of 2020. It's 50 acres in size, and there's going to be, obviously, with the repurposing of this, a major, major transformation in Redondo Beach and really the entire South Bay. The site's only zoned for industrial uses, conditionally, or a park. So AES has had the site for sale for 2 years for non-industrial uses. Back in 2008, we passed a Measure DD, which amended our city charter, which now requires a public vote for any major change in allowable land use, technical phrase. So what goes here, what rezoning goes here will not be made by some elected officials in the middle of the night on a narrow vote. The voters are going to be deciding in an election at the polls. And that's what's really, really unique about this site, because most areas, it does not require a public vote, and as you can imagine, there's a lot of moving and grooving and shaking and jiving behind the scenes to get something done with a much more smaller body. So what initiated this event was a recent trip I took to Alaska, of all places. And I got an email one day and said, hey, come to Alaska, be part of this Mayor's Institute on Community Design. It's sponsored by the National Endowment of the Arts, and they do these, I think, 2 or 3 times a year, and they invited 6 mayors from around the country and a variety of experts from around the country to sit for 2 days in a room, show the projects that you have, and get the feedback from experts in other parts of the country. So it was a great opportunity, and I jumped on it. And I felt very honored, because they had looked at hundreds of cities around the country, and Redondo, little old Redondo Beach is one of the cities they selected. And when you see the opportunity we have, which you guys all know, it's understandable why they did that. So at the end of it, I'd gotten so much great feedback, and I wanted to share it with everybody, but I'm not an expert, and I really, really wanted somehow to impart everything that I had learned and the insights that I had gained onto the community. And one of the gentlemen I met was Richard Wilson, who I'm going to introduce more formally later. And he helped with Millennium Park, and he was just so excited about the whole thing and was asking me a bunch of questions and telling me this, telling me that. I go, wow, Richard, if you're ever in LA, would you come and meet with the community and just kind of give your insights? And he said, oh, I'll do better than that. We'll just schedule a definite time, and I'll come out here on my own dime and I'll be happy to meet with the community and share my experiences and answer their questions and show them what I think of this. So it was really Richard's gracious offer that got me going and said, okay, well, then we're going to do this. And so, yeah, big round for Richard. So one of the most important aspects I've learned about this opportunity and in talking to the others and up at the event in Alaska was that the city needs to lead this process, right? Instead of just sitting around in kind of a passive way and waiting for a developer to come with a big plan or whatever ends up happening, we really need to get out front on this and give an idea of what we're looking for, how we would view it, how it would unfold, and how would we get the money and all that sort of thing. So I decided to take a much more proactive approach instead of just sitting back and being more passive. So tonight and future events like this will be about educating the public up front about how these public venues get built when opportunities present themselves instead of just waiting around, as I described. So tonight, it's not just about listening to me. It's about proposing designs, listening to the experts, and you formulating your own ideas about how this can happen and what's at stake here. I didn't really go through my slides, I apologize. But these were some of the cities that were in the Mayor's Institute on Community Design that showed up in Alaska. Here's a group of people. There were mayors from Idaho Falls, places in Colorado, a lady from Union City. It was really, really a good group of people. So I have a video I'm going to show. Most of you have seen the video. It's a great aerial video that shows basically what we have before us, describes a little bit about the history. Most of you have probably seen it, but I know some of you haven't. But it does a good job of framing up what we have before us. So let me start that. Well, we don't have any sound. Not sure what happened. Technical difficulties. Is there something on here? I doubt it. It was working. Yeah. Let's try this again. Give them a minute. I think they're working on it. What do you think, Patty? Any ideas? Yeah, it's fine. Let me try it again. Well, I guess we're not going to have sound, so I'll just walk you through it. How about that? So you're going to see in a second the actual power plant. There it is. It's 50 acres. There's a harbor in the background. There were 19 of these power plants on the coast of California. All of them are retiring or being repurposed. This particular plant here is going to retire permanently, along with plants like Morro Bay, Chula Vista, and a couple others. So there's a harbor in the background. There's looking east. That's the the Edison power line corridor to the left. And everybody's familiar with the Wyland Wall there to the right. There's the old Salt Lake. That's taken from 1908. That's what used to be here, a giant Salt Lake. It's a state landmark, and the community's looking to actually restore a piece of that wetland and create a habitat and wildlife and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of money out there for that, and the state and other agencies are quite excited. There's the old Redondo Beach red car. You used to be able to take that from downtown in 30 minutes. How about that? Try that, 2018. About an hour and a half, 2. Hey, there are the old tall ships, right? This used to be the port of LA, and they'd come in, drop their lumber off right on the rail lines that went out to the pier. Redondo Beach has a really, really rich history. A lot of people don't realize that. San Pedro, one out for LA Harbor. There's looking east, that's Dominguez Park. Then you turn around west, this is our drone video. You see the power line site, its nurseries mostly underneath it. That's Hermosa Beach off in the distance, as you know. The 190th. There's actually two sets of power lines there. Large 220 kV lines, which are definitely can be removed. There's on the right there, you see the smaller 66 kV lines, which I know can be removed, or I've been told, from Prospect to the power plant, but they may have to stay or be buried, the smaller lines to the right. There's our power plant, power line cluster that we've had for however long. That's the 232 bus, Metro 232 bus that drives down PCH. That's Highway 1, got about 80,000 cars a day there. That's looking east from the power plant. That's the post office building there. You guys are all familiar with that. There's 6 acres of active wetland that the Coast Commission has determined, or active wetlands looking to restore. There's a shot of our harbor again, 1,400 slip boat harbor. There's an entrance to our harbor. Looking south, of course, it's Palos Verdes Peninsula. Coming up on the Seaside Lagoon. People love the Seaside Lagoon. I was swimming in that when I was 8 years old in 1966, if you can believe that. There's a sport fishing pier. We've allocated monies to replace. Where yet, we're not sure. There's our full pier in the distance. There's a mouth of the harbor. We have a beautiful harbor, direct access to the ocean, very close. There's our new Class 1 bike path, award-winning, I might add. There's a Sea Lab on the right, trying to find a place for them. And that's our big opportunity. So here we are. Sorry we didn't have any sound. Most of you have seen it anyway. So anyway, with that, we're going to have a panel discussion here. They're going to give some presentations. We're very, very fortunate for them to come and spend their valuable time with us. A lot of people are excited about it, but few people are willing to just show up and take time out of their busy schedules to come and help us. So first up is going to be Richard Wilson. He's with Smith Gordon Architects in Chicago. Richard leads the city design practice of Adrian Smith and Gordon Gill Architecture in Chicago. Richard's an architect and city planner with more than 3 decades of experience working with public and private sector clients around the world to envision, design, build dynamic regions, cities, urban districts, and neighborhoods. His work focuses on large-scale urban development and redevelopment in historic and emergent cities worldwide. Richard was involved with the master planning for Chicago's Millennium Park, the Chicago Riverwalk, and 760 acres along the north branch of the Chicago River, where land is transitioning from industrial to mixed use. His global practice includes award-winning work throughout North America, China, India, and the Middle East, including 3 National Urban Design Awards from the American Institute of Architects. Richard serves on the board of directors for the National Parks Conservation Association and Friends of the Chicago River. Richard is currently leading master planning for the 2020 World's Fair in Dubai and advocating for new riverfront parkland in Chicago. Let's welcome Richard Wilson.
Get the clicker. All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for the invitation, and I was so proud to meet your mayor and to learn this tremendous opportunity, and we recognize these are the kind of major projects that unfold, in many chapters over the life of a city, and so I was just so intrigued when we got to spend time in Alaska and learn about this, 50 acres on the coast, and it's really unique, and I see this in my work across the United States. So many communities have these old industrial plants or old pieces of infrastructure or industrial areas that have kind of lost their day, and you're so fortunate that you actually get kind of the second bite of the apple. And I was just blown away, unlike where I'm from in Chicago, that you actually have an active say and a vote in what happens in your city. So I don't come tonight, that's right. So I want to be clear, I don't come tonight with a design proposal. I'm not selling anything. This is really a sister-to-sister kind of collaboration and discussion. For 20 years, I've been working in the city of Chicago, both with the city and at the neighborhood and citizen level. So really want to kind of share some of the stories, some of the lessons we've learned, show you how we've gone about projects. Not that it's the perfect fit here, but hopefully there'll be bits and pieces here that you can take away so that you can start to have a conversation amongst yourselves, with the mayor, and with your partners as the land is purchased and moves forward in development, so that you could imagine your home in the next chapter in your future. So if I just introduce my firm for a moment, we're probably best known for pretty tall buildings, including the world's largest, tallest building in Dubai. We have the world's next tallest building under construction in Jeddah. So if your community process leads you to decide that you need the world's next tallest building in Redondo Beach, California, at that point, we'd be glad to come back and have a chat. But in addition to that, you know, buildings have to fit in a place. So I lead what's called a city design practice, and it's really working at the community level to understand the quality of life that we're able to offer through our parks, our open spaces, the programs that we have, places for that, and work takes me all over the world. But I tell you, I'm just so passionate about work that you get to do in your home. It means the most at the end of the day. So I want to show you a little bit about Chicago, and so I thought I would start out with what we call our central area. It's really our downtown, but it's 12 large neighborhoods that all come together, and it's really the... all right. All right, very good. Question is, could we dim the lights just a bit, please? Well done. Well done. Excellent. That a little better? All right, good. You know, we've been working to identify some of these sites, like you have the power plant here. We have old industrial rail corridors. We have old power plant sites that are there. And really looking to where areas that we have to grow. So the blue that you see here are opportunity sites where we started to kind of think ahead about what kinds of development policy we need, what we would need of our development partners that would purchase property, how we would service it with all modes of transportation, and really focusing on the parks and open space that make the city vibrant. We've really ranted around how we're going to grow our employment core, complete our lakefront park system. The huge story emerging from Chicago today is how the river is really reintroducing this next phase of growth in our life. And really, this all kind of started with something we didn't understand the magnitude of when we started to have conversations about it and actually got it built, was the impact of Millennium Park. So I'll talk about that in pretty good detail. So again, we kind of grew and started out along the lakefront. We've been growing further to the west near our regional transportation systems, trying to understand what that next generation of rail is, but also recognizing that people love to bike and to walk, and we need to provide park spaces and connectivity so that people have the opportunity to do that. And we're pursuing kind of these mega projects, you know, that would take a lifetime to deliver new high-speed rail service that links, and those are very important. But at the same time, really trying to look at the streets and the places we have and redesign them so they perform better. So I was so proud to see your bike track that's there. I spent some time on it today. Really fantastic job with that, so we could learn from you. You know, we don't have the ocean where we are, but we do have a spectacular lakefront and a beautiful park system, yet we still have places where we have some missing teeth. So when I go along your area and this beautiful community and I see the power plant, I think, oh, you know, there's something that you have the opportunity to work on. So a few years we've been working on how we could actually expand and develop more parkland. And so today what we're doing is looking at the redesign of Lakeshore Drive, the main highway that goes along the lakefront there, and trying to imagine how we can smooth out some high accident points, how we can actually guard against the lake blowing into the roadway during our blizzard and winter season, and actually creating more parkland in the city. The river, again, is kind of our big story. So Chicago, we grew up with a beautiful lakefront, kind of envy of the world, except California here on the beautiful ocean. We developed large parks is how we grew as a city, and we would develop neighborhoods around those. But what we've never had was a very strong vision for the role of the river as contributing to quality of life, because it was always a working industrial river. So as now we move into the 21st century, we're having great conversation and opportunity in front of us to think of how the river can connect neighborhoods and improve quality of life. So this is a project that started working on in 2009. It's the Chicago Riverwalk, and we've completed the area in downtown. It's the red line there called the main branch. And we wanted to bring people down to the river. We used not to be able to walk along the edge. We'd have to climb up and around each one of these bridges. So we've actually valued parkland. We've built underbridge connections, created 3 miles of continuous walkway there, and created a place that's truly active day and night. So this was kind of the vision and early planning with the community, and we knew that we wanted to kind of treat each room to have its own identity and its own kind of activity. We would have places that were more active, where you could actually bring boats up in the daytime. We have children's play areas. We have swim and splash areas. But as I was going through this, when we wrapped up, they would say, "Oh, Richard, this is beautiful. We would love to do this, but you're crazy. This will never happen. This is $100 million. Where on earth will this ever come from? We just can't do it." 2009, mind you, and within 9 years, we had actually banded together, figured it out, got the thing built, and now it's driving the next generation of growth in our city. So I just look at this 50-acre site that you have here, and if you get this right, and I know you will, the benefit to this community, anything that you invest in this will come back to you tenfold. In terms of what this is doing for us, this new Riverwalk, so today we have many new buildings that are approved or under construction in the middle of the city, adjacent to the river. As we go south along our river, we're cleaning up old industrial sites. We've completed rezoning. We have development that's coming in here that's just been announced for major new tech businesses. And then as we move along the north branch of the river, again, an old industrial area that we're trying to clean up. And so this is the north branch area of our city today. All the low buildings are old industrial areas, old rail lines, old power plants, old barge shipping areas that, frankly, their useful life has passed. So we've just changed the development regulations. We're enabling major new density. We're linking with new transportation systems that are here. And now the developers are coming forward. So we actually have 5 50-acre sites that have just been purchased. Now here comes the rush of developers. They're beating down the door. They're telling us they need $1 billion of public investment in infrastructure in order for them to make $100 billion of profit. And so we're in the throes of that. So we're seeing a lot of pretty pictures like this. I'm really nervous because all I see when I look at this is all the concrete along the river. So we have 4 miles of new concrete to build along the river. That doesn't seem right. So, the first 20 years of my career has been with the city of Chicago, and it's a labor of love. It's kind of interesting now because I've fallen on the side of the community where we think we can do better. So we've been working and banded together a civic alliance of major design, nature advocacy, sports, neighborhood, and business groups. We formed a Friends Coalition. And so this is what the developer has in mind, and although we're very excited about the development potential, this is what we're advocating for. It's that we can have both, because as a city, we will never be more leveraged than we are the day that these major parcels have been purchased and the day they come forward to seek development approval. And this is not anti-development whatsoever. First and foremost, this is an economic development issue. Access to parks and open space is a key to attracting top talent and retaining it, to building active and healthy communities. It's a transportation improvement because you make places where people want to bike and walk and can go up the river to interconnect places. And it's well documented, a minimum of 15% increase in adjacent or in property value for those that own the property. It's an increase in tax value for the municipality. It's an increase for anybody that has property where they're trying to, broker property because people go into leases much quicker along the river. So in the end, you can have both and the value, and it's really is key. And it's really thinking about intergenerational benefits. So not just do the quick thing, make the deal, get it done. It's really thinking about the legacy of the city, our heritage, how we've grown, and doing our part as stewards of our community when we're about to see such major change. So when I met Bill in Alaska and I saw this, and then today, being here and really looking at the site, and tonight, looking at this great crowd here, very interested. I'm just very excited about the potential that you have in front of you to do amazing things. So we banded together, we kind of pushed back. We've created some images here to show how we could have both. We're talking about how we could have natural restored wetlands along the water area, how we could bring people into an area of the city where they've never been since we were founded, so more than 150 years to enjoy nature in the center of the city. All right. So, I wanted to I'll just kind of wrap up on this, a little bit more about Millennium Park. And hopefully you've seen Millennium Park, or some had visited here. And I tell you, this was a long, hard-fought battle. We didn't know what we were getting into when we started this, but I know for sure we could never have envisioned the tremendous amount of benefit it's delivered back to us tenfold. So this is Millennium Park. It was a 24-acre parking lot and rail yard in the middle of the city. It's old Illinois Central Railroad that came right through the city and still runs there today. Beautiful, look familiar. And so, we thought we could do better. So we're within Grant Park, kind of an old turn-of-the-century park system that had a series of rooms. So we really wanted to complete this last part of the city, or of the park system in the downtown. So what this is, it's actually still an active rail bus line. It has levels of parking there. It has a park that's actually a big green roof cap. And a lot of the parking that's under there is actually part of our economic strategy to actually pay and maintain the park above. Hello. All right. So here's the master plan. So, a lot of community process to talk about what kinds of things we would like. So, the parks I just showed you on the river were about active recreation, and I've seen some past work and visioning here, and, so that could be a component of it. We don't have any natural wetlands area. Like I said, it's an elevated area, but just imagine what you could do thinking about the old Salt Lake as a central point in there. And it's amazing. If you give nature half a chance, it's amazing how it will come back and take over and enrich a community. And then I thought this would be helpful just to kind of get it in our minds, a scale comparison. And this one kind of surprised me. So you'll recognize this. This is Redondo Beach, and that's the power plant site that's there. So if you lay in Millennium Park into the corner, just to get a sense of size, I'm not saying tearing down the old buildings you might want to reuse and all of that, but literally just to compare size, you see it's about half of the land, 24 acres, or in other words, it's 6 large city blocks devoted to parkland. And then you see all the development land you have around that. So I just have to dream a little bit when I see those old pictures of the Salt Lake. If I kind of imagine the community before a lot of folks lived here in the Indians, how that was probably, kind of a focal and congregation point. I wonder if there are wonderful ways that you could work with that idea. You could take components of a park and spread that around, but, you still have other land, so I think you have to have a real discussion about what kind of development is right and fits here, and find that balance so that you can actually pay and deliver for all the community benefits that you seek, and that you create a structure where you can provide operating and maintenance capital for ongoing operations. So we did ours through, created a variety of new landmarks, and I'll just kind of walk through these. So we started out, we were just going to do a park. We're going to get it built in 3 years. We started out just thinking it was going to be kind of grass and simple. But then along the way, people started to get excited about it. Our corporate partners, philanthropist partners, families in the community actually started to kind of layer onto that and wanted to be a part of it. So we had a contribution here, Pritzker Bandshell, Frank Gehry structure, have all kinds of community events as well as major symphony and dance events. A great lawn here. It's very important to us that we have an area where you can buy seats and sit there and watch that, but we also have an area for 11,000 people that is always free and clear to the public. You can come enjoy any show that's there. It's not closed off to ticket holders only, so it's always a public space. Should probably find a more flattering picture, but it's actually used for community health and yoga on the weekends, every Saturday and Sunday morning. It's really a lot of fun. And then, not to get too technical here, but another thing that was really smart, I thought, was that we had 3 or 4 small performance groups, dance, ballet, opera, that alone had been trying to raise money to build their own facility and couldn't quite pull that off. So what we were able to do is actually pool their resources, develop an indoor theater that shares the back of house with the big band shell that I just showed you there. And in this way, we were able to help many organizations move forward in a coordinated manner and be part of the park. We have great new landmarks. Many of these were competitions, and you could decide how to have competitions for the whole site just to get a broader range of views and ideas here. As you get down and you advance, you could get into specific elements here. So this is our cloud gate, or the bean as everybody calls it. Kind of a one-of-a-kind fountain, the Crown Fountain, which is wonderful. It's a little shallow pool of water that really attracts children, and all the faces are filmed faces that are active, kind of TV screens of Chicagoans. It's so wonderful to be downtown. Every about 15 minutes, these mouths sprout water, and the kids all know it's coming. They gather there, and it spits out, and you just hear the eruption of kids' laughter and screaming. It's really brought a level of animation to downtown, and certainly has a wonderful sculptural quality when the last thing you want to do is be out in the park. And just a couple more slides here. And so this is the Lurie Garden by Catherine Gustafson. And this is another thing that really caught us off guard we didn't see. So this was the idea, is maybe there would be a quiet corner on the side of the park that wasn't so active about music and events, a place where you could go and enjoy nature. And within a year, and we planted it with all native species and provided that, within a year we started to see rabbits and birds and butterflies and insects this area of the city had not seen in 100 years. And it actually got us to thinking about a completely new planting approach to our parkways and along our streets in the city. And it's just been wonderful that you have this and water as part of the park as well. We have places for kind of outdoor dining in the summer that turn into ice rinks in the winter. We have areas for temporary art so that there's always something new to see in this public space when you visit. And although slightly ironic, this is the McDonald's, as in the hamburger, bike and fitness center, but this is a great feature as well, because this is a place where commuters can come in. You go in, they have showers, you can actually ride your bike into work, get ready, go to work. They fix the bikes, and it's really added a layer of activity to the park as well. So Millennium Park on the top there, and then we've just kind of grown and added to that. So more of a children's focused park, this area that you see in the lower portion of the screen, Maggie Daly Park. So again, more of a children's play focus to grow this park system. And of course, you have to have a Frank Gehry Bridge to link both sides. So I'm very intrigued on how your site actually connects across the street to get over to the ocean. I wonder how that power line corridor, how that can actually lead you out to the ocean. I wonder how it interacts with your cycle track that's there. I think just such rich opportunity here to not only look at a park feature, but to think about how that can be active day and night, what kinds of development are right around the edges, really frame a great public room and space to bring back that wetland and that heritage and history that's unique. And don't do a copy and paste from any place, even if it's cool like Millennium Park. Really have a conversation about what's right here and authentic, and why how you would invite folks from outside of the city to come learn and see what's unique to this part of the world. Okay, now nobody go away from here saying the mayor's proposing to do a $500 million anything. Okay, but I did want to talk cost because it's important. So I guess the big takeaway here was just this major participation from the private sector once they had something to believe in and to participate in. The public side there, we were so Chicago on that. We have $150 million. We don't have any idea where it went. We have 2 or 3 people in jail for bribery. I mean, we did it really good, you know. So that number's a bit inflated. But we did the base bill. We had a garage. We had a commuter rail piece on there. You know, so it turned into a big number. But wow, not a bit of this was, you know, asked for. It all came forward and really made the difference. So I'm just certain once you get started here, the possibilities are endless. But here's the punchline and why I kind of went through that. Within 10 years, you start to see the annual levels of spending in the billions of dollars. The new jobs that this has created is tremendous. And although I don't know that adding a lot of residential here is right, you guys are pretty tight-knit, but you know, we really needed it because we had been through a period where folks had left the downtown area of the city. So investment in this park has given us a focus. It's really grown the number of residential units downtown, and again, the value in taxes that support the important work that we need to do across the city is significant. So hopefully there's some things of interest there. I look forward to kind of follow up on Q&A. And most of all, this was our opening celebration night here. I can't wait to see what you do here and look forward to your celebration. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Yeah. So, yeah, Redondo Beach is not Chicago, but I think you get the flavor that they're all dealing with the exact same things, right? The types of open space they're looking at, how they get to it, what type of public-private partnership they enter into, and how the community can guide what happens here. So next up, we have Ben Feldman, principal with Studio MLA Architects downtown. It's a more local firm. It's a 40-person firm that includes landscape architects, urban designers, community advocates, botanists, ecologists, and technical experts. Diversity and multiple perspectives add depth and meaning to the collaborative process, allowing them to bring design and implementation expertise to a variety of projects, from park master planning to intimate plazas and gardens. Ben is a landscape architect and urban designer with 20 years experience who integrates ecologically sound, system-based thinking into his work. As a principal at Studio MLA, he spearheads many of the firm's public realm-oriented projects and provides oversight and leadership on design and planning in the studio. Striving for resilient communities and urban regeneration, he seeks solutions with environmental synergies between built social and natural spheres. Ben received his Master of Urban Design from University of California, Berkeley, Bachelor of Landscape Architecture from California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo. He's there on his own time and on his own interest, so let's give him a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Your projects.
Thank you. Let's make sure the mic is on. Oh, it's on. All right, great. All right, so seems to be working. Thank you all for coming. I know everybody has a busy schedule. I got my 2 daughters back at home, but it's really important to have this ability to share, I think, some ideas and what a vision really means to you all, and you all should have your own unique ideas. I think the work that was just shared was really extraordinary, and that, you know, I think you need that ability to kind of look beyond in terms of what other people are doing, but then look within to really understand what this place means to you all in Redondo Beach. So thank you, Mayor Brand, for just reaching out to us. I'm going to share a little bit, or a lot of it, on one particular project and an experience that's, it's not a finished project. We aspire to be Millennium Park, but sometimes things take a little bit longer than you expect. And I think the most important thing is to have a real champion amongst you all to make sure that the vision isn't lost and that you retain that vision no matter what. We had a chance to talk with Mayor Brand, our president, Mia Lair, who founded the company, and I came down and took a look at the site, and this idea of peering through this chain link fence to what is the future was really intriguing, and hearing a little bit about what is happening on the site today in the sense of nature reemerging. So you have water creeping into this site, no matter whether somebody thinks it's a wetland or not, there's something happening here, right? So the sense of nature lost and these industrial sites is something that's coming up more and more. And so peering over, of course, the storage shed, this facility here, it's that sense of these backdoor conditions that these cities have made. And as you can tell, I'm California sort of rooted in my studies and education, but I'm also grew up at the coast in Santa Barbara and had the fortune to be living within earshot of the sound of the waves breaking. And so when I talked to Mayor Brown and said, why do you need a park? You got the beach. This is it. Like, this is all you need. And I'm sure many of you came here just because there is the coast, there is that beach, the one-of-a-kind Pacific Ocean. But what a park could do in relationship with the ocean is an extraordinary idea and feature. We are an office actually just down the street here in the industrial corridor of downtown Los Angeles. Back in the day, I was working out of San Francisco and got a call from, at the time, working for another firm, an urban design firm called Perkins & Will, and they said they had an opportunity for me to come down and look at this site. This site is called the Piggyback Yard. It's an active intermodal freight yard that, let me go back one moment, is 125 acres sitting right in downtown. I keep doing that. So trying to get the laser, here we go. It keeps jumping around. So anyways, downtown, I think you can make out Dodger Stadium. Well, it's really sensitive. Dodger Stadium to your upper left. And what you're not seeing in that picture is any sort of nature, right? But this man, who's one of the most amazing people I've come across professionally, his name is Lewis McAdams. He founded the Friends of the LA River over 30 years ago, and the first 20 years of his career was just going around to people in Los Angeles saying, yes, there is a river in Los Angeles, and it's right there. The last 10 years have been really instrumental, and we've got a lot of ground support to do small projects around the river. He came to us and said, I've got a project for you. What can you do to help me? And along the way, we began to realize that the Los Angeles River has had a long way to go. They put up these signs just to let people know when you're driving 40 miles across the bridges that there's a river underneath you. And you forget that, and you lose sense of it because of all the concrete. And it's not easy, to kind of see it when you're on the ground, but when there is a rain event, this is sort of why it's there, right? So we're building out this massive channel out of concrete, which was at the time the biggest project in the 1940s from a WPA-era project to dump all this concrete and, per the Army Corps' design, move water as quickly and efficiently from the mountains to the sea as possible. Now that paradigm has changed. We know we can do it in other ways, and we shouldn't need to see it more commonly like this. And I don't know if you've been in the river, but it's an amazing experience. Most of the time you might see it like this, but that's maybe another era altogether. We do spend a lot of time looking at history. There's a lot of things we can learn. Before it was full of concrete, it was actually this dry stream bed, and that's very common in Southern California rivers. There's not always water in it, and sometimes it's running underground. But what does that mean from a history? This photo is indicative of what LA looked like in that time, and you can see the river running up to the right here. And the important thing that's telling us about this is that the river and the rail were always having a relationship together. And that's important for us in this site because in this image here, I'll zoom in, it was this fallow land that was seemingly wet, and we were able to tell that water probably pushed through here, but the rails all came to its edges. And taking the path of least resistance, running kind of very shallow grade, we're basically knitting Los Angeles with the rail industry, with the river. And this is really hard to undo. But there does come a time, and this is a type of academic bit of jargon called drawscape, but this is what we do as professionals, is look for these opportunities to suss out what is becoming undone by industry. What are these things that no longer function in our current state of technology and moving away from that? And this is an aerial shot of what the piggyback yard looks like. Again, it's right across from downtown. Just across from the other bank is Union Station. What are those opportunities there? What we can do to not only think about putting in a park, but what could it and should it be? Of course, the LA River has a master plan that was developed in 2006, and in that master plan, it looked at the entirety of the watershed. What's important about that is that it's not just about the water, it's not just about that lineal line, but it's about the neighborhoods and all that land that connects into the river. And when you think about streets and street trees, as well as the smaller tributaries, you begin to develop this quite extensive network and tapping into it. So it's also very important to set a certain amount of goals that help you identify what you're really trying to get to. So this is about creating a continuous river greenway, about connecting the neighborhoods, extending open space and the water quality, as well as enhancing the river's identity. And then finally, as you just saw, how do we incorporate public art and other amenities into this space and idea? Now, of course, when you start any project, you begin to think, how big is big? So 125 acres is the same outline over these different spaces. And here's that Millennium Park project that we just saw. So in this case, we could have fit a couple Millennium Parks in there easily. And also just understanding what the importance means when you build up this urbanism and this fabric right around its edges, like you might have in Central Park. Of course, it's almost the size of LAX, which is quite amazing. Another relevant project would be the Hudson Yards in New York, which is just about to finish up, I believe. So at the end of the day, Louis McAdams, the founder of Friends of the LA River, just simply said, create an image for me. Tell me what you could do here. And so we gave it a lot of thought, and this was a pro bono project where we just all came together as a series of professionals, included 4 different offices, and began to meet with various people from the city. Ask them, what does this mean to them? What do we need to know technically? What do we need to know asking the community members? How do we better connect and make a more accessible space? And we didn't just give an image. We really took it to heart in terms of what are those opportunities. And this is fundamentally starting with the movement of the river itself. So on the image to the left, it's about a broadened river. What does it mean to kind of improve the habitat? How do we move water in an interesting way? Versus the river strand on the right is more about how do we manage the water flow and potentially hold it in place and do something special with it, save it for the long term. And so we ended up coming up with these 2 master plans. One was the broadened river that you just saw, as well as the river strand. We also developed and layered in this idea of a framework. So it's not just about water, it's also about open space. How do we better connect not only streets, but also public transportation, bikeways, trails, things that are more informal, and then finally layer in that important sense of community and development opportunities. And some of the images that came out of that experience and what it could be like to walk along a series of wetlands or create play fields, a new museum amenity. Also being in the river, understanding how to create paths along and in and around the railway. And then finally, when that flood does come, you can begin to see the potential impact in terms of creating that storage space. How do we do that in a way where we come back and you appreciate how it can connect into this bigger system? So this is that network of spaces around it, so it's not always about this site. What was amazing about this experience is that we were just doing something for this fellow to help support his cause in the Friends of the LA River. We didn't really think we would sort of end up with a park. We didn't really have many expectations, but we just wanted to help him get the word out. The city took all that work and they gave it to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And we thought, well, they'll probably have a couple questions, but just kind of burn it or put it aside. But instead, they incorporated it into their report about how the river can change. And you see that blip there at the bottom of the page. That is the largest singular site that they're looking to incorporate into their study and the future planning of this river. So their ideas were, a little bit different than ours. This is the current site again. This is sort of what they were proposing to do. This is what it is without that development. Now, I sort of wonder what that experience might be with the industrial fringe around you and how safe you might feel, but there's that point at which development and having a little bit of a light, on at night kind of feels a little bit safer, a little bit more honest. I studied this plan, obviously, through the night and through the days, and I saw this funny figure that they incorporated into the planning page and diagrammatically what they're showing, and I said, wow, that looks really familiar, and it seems like they kind of borrowed what we were planning. So that was a big compliment. They didn't send me any thank you letters or anything, but we ended up getting hired on to do another study, a feasibility study. So that we did a good job. We kind of showed an idea of what you could do, but we felt like we could do it better. So we looked at those two first master plans and then came up with a third idea of treating the water. Instead of holding it all together or just leaving it open, we decided to create a managed approach and come forward with the idea about islands. And so these islands allow water to move through the wetland, push through, and have a flow that's needed so you don't have stagnant water, but it also allows for this larger capacity to take place. What we're seeing are a pair of diagrams that the engineers we brought on board began to study and show what that stress might look like on a 50-year storm event level, basically proving that this concept actually works. The Army Corps does not study this. One thing to point out, and I learned along the way, is we're working in 3D models, and this is a 3D engineering computational fluid dynamic modeler. So that's working with a full volume of space. The Army Corps still works with a 1D engineering method to do their tests. Just something to say about where the Army Corps is and where they should be. So we felt fairly comfortable and began to kind of show these diagrams. We also looked beyond to understand what the capacity would be for this site to actually work as a liver to help clean up all those stormwater contaminants coming out of the adjacent properties before they enter the river, and developed an idea about connecting as a series of developments to the local artists that are just north of the site and the brewery, if you happen to see that space, or USC's medical campus, and create a small unit for their conferences, hosting academic facilities for the housing, workforce housing coming into Mission, and then across the river would be the transit district behind Union Station. We ended up building this model, concluding with a report, and basically seeing this vision play out into the future and connecting with what is the state parks land, state parks just below Dodger Stadium, which is now complete, and seeing this into the big picture of how this space really makes a huge difference at the end of the day. I got this personal email from Mayor Garcetti telling me that we're just very close to the decision to tell the Army Corps back in the day in 2013. And then a few months later, the announcement passed that $1 billion would be approved towards the LA River. And so the mayor thanked everybody for pulling the line, and that money was there. This project was on the part of many different offices, Perkins & Will, Mia Lair, technical advisors from the city of Los Angeles, engineering firms, and many contributors and people that were engaged on the project from their own right. We've continued to do more studies on the LA River. Again, our office is actually just upstream from this, and the city of LA said, well, the master plan is reaching its 10 years. What would you do today, knowing everything that you do? And what could those possibilities be? And similarly, interested in getting people down into the river and making those connections underneath the rail. How can those two things live together? That is the historic Sears site up in LA, and looking at ways to use some of the remnant properties to support the redevelopment of that project. And this is one option, but we also looked at a second option that would create a type of solar type of technology to create a shade canopy above a promenade that would elevate above the tracks and connect in and around the site. And this is actually a more recent project that we're working with a Danish architecture firm about creating not only what would be much needed housing in Los Angeles, but also how to create connections over the rail into the river, as well as create public amenities, open promenade decks, as well as a type of sculpture garden and other cultural community amenities. So we're just excited to hear what's your vision, and I think I'm going to turn it right over to Mayor Brand. Thank you.
Thanks, Brandon. That's great. Yeah. Well, there's a project, and I think you'll see it consistent with all these projects, is they start with no money. They start with one or two people or a group of people who have a vision, see something different, and those people stick with it. 20 years of just identifying the river for people. Look what it became. Really, really inspiring. Anyway, our next guest has actually been working with the city a lot for about the last 10 years. It's Larry Cosmont. He's president and CEO of Cosmont Corporation, Cosmont Companies, which he founded in 1986. Cosmont Companies is an industry leader in public-private real estate transactions and economic development. In 2015, he launched Cosmont Transaction Services, which sources financing for public-private projects, P3 initiatives, and infrastructure funding. You'll hear the term P3 a lot, and that just means public-private partnerships. Mr. Cosmont served as interim city administrator for the city of Montebello, May 2011 to 2012, as part of a financial turnaround assignment awarded to Cosmont Companies. From 1975 to 1986, Mr. Cosmont served as city manager, director of community development, and redevelopment director in the cities of Santa Monica, Seal Beach, Bell Gardens, and Burbank. Mr. Cosmont holds a Master's of Public Administration degree from USC, a BA in Political Science from the State University of New York, Binghamton. As I said, Larry's been with the city for about 10 years now, and he basically knows everybody in the LA County region, and everybody knows him. So we're really lucky to have him. So welcome, Larry Cosmont.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks. Wow, it's so exciting to be here. I'm really, as a professional that works solely on what we call public-private transactions, there is nothing more exciting than be at the front end of the kinds of projects that Richard and Ben are talking about. These are hard-fought, long-term endeavors. So as you stand here, you sit here tonight, and thank you, Mayor Bill Brand, for convening this. The city of Redondo Beach has just an awe-inspiring opportunity to change the character of their waterfront. And the interesting thing about this is you start, I think, from the consummate position of strength. As we've said, there's a public vote required to help a developer and to help us figure out what we really want. Now, here's the thing. We have to figure out what we want. And that becomes an important part of the journey that we're about to take. Now, you've seen two great architects, know both firms quite well, take you through the pathway of design and discussion. And there's a collateral pathway that goes with that, which is what really Cosmon is involved in with many, many communities up and down the state. We've been doing this for 32 years. And the elements of public-private projects are much different than when you and I go buy a house or buy a commercial piece of property or buy a building and revitalize it. No, no, no. This is nothing like that. First of all, you're in coastal California. That puts you in a different nation in terms of land use, right? You know, I would say there's two Californians. There's sort of east, and then there's the coast. And the coast, land use in the coast, is a full tilt battle for entitlements. We know that. We know that here. We know that in Northern California and Southern California. Why? Because people really want to demand the absolute best that they can get out of private investment to make sure that their community benefits from it in multitudinal ways. It's important to get it right. It's important to have the conversation. It's important that we understand design. It's also important that we understand economics. A bit of these slides talk about economics because at the end of the day, a buyer is going to appear. They're going to control the property. In many cases, in many of the projects we work on, these are public spaces, public properties. Not here. We may think as a community that we actually own the AES site, but we don't. We can manage the transition to a different use, which is certainly a long time in coming. But it is still a process that requires a public sector set of inputs and funds and a private sector set of inputs and funds. And so basically where we are is we're saying just as the great case studies that we've seen, the AES revitalization is truly an opportunity to use the advent of a large coastal regional park as a driver of image, attraction, and land value. So what does that mean? It means that much as both Richard and Ben showed, the end product of great projects become the image of a community. They become the personality. They become essentially the core of how a community can think about itself, how it recreates, how it interacts with itself. And we see that in Millennium Park. And we're going to see it, I think, at someday on the LA River in a number of different places. But to get there takes money. And for us to expect to be able to, in addition to the leverage that we have in terms of a public vote and zoning actions that the mayor and city council ultimately have to approve, but which you have to also approve as a constituency. In addition to that, we still have to come to the table with sources of funds to get done what we ultimately want. If we want to shop for a better quality of life, and we want to execute on a set of public amenities, we need funds. And in this case, these funds can come from a combination of the taxes that get created by a project. I think some of the slides that showed the size of Millennium Park as compared to the overall size, let's say, of the total AES property, I think Richard said maybe half, about half. So in a way, if you split the loaf, and I'm not suggesting we have to do that, but if you do, you can have half the site as fund generating, in other words, tax revenue from a variety of sources, sales tax, hotel tax, and then you can have the balance of the site operating as a public amenity. And you can operate that in a lot of different ways. So in order to prepare for a community-led design discussion that results in an exemplary project, which is what we all want. I live in the South Bay. I'm going past that plant every day almost on my bicycle wondering why is it there. But to get to a better place is a combination of public sources and private sources. Well, what are the private sources? The private sources can come from fees, they can come from required conditions of approval, they can come from concessions payments if we negotiate certain concessions on the property, in the park, from a developer. These are all potential sources. The point is that the public sources plus the private sources can equal the installation of a large park, which would include, by the way, the installation of probably a pretty substantial private development, unless, of course, we could find the money to buy the entire site. Probably going to be very, very challenging to do. It's a question that the council has grappled with, that the staff has grappled with. It's not easy to raise that kind of money. So the point is what can we do and where can we get funds? So in preparation for the search for funding to deliver an extraordinary project along the lines that both these architects would identify for us, along the lines of all of which we could imagine for ourselves, in order to do that, the City Council has already authorized moving forward with creating a special tax district. The state of California has in the last 4 or 5 years created some special sustainability and housing districts. In this case, this district would be about sustainability, the restoration of wetlands, the installation of park and recreation facilities. And these districts, called Enhanced Infrastructure Financing Districts, allow the city to collect the tax increment that comes from new development, not existing taxes, from new development, and put them toward the installation and the payment of public amenities and infrastructure. So in a way, you saw that last slide, the district becomes a convergence point where we can take the value from private investment and put it into a project that we want. In addition, there's public money. Last year, the electorate voted and approved Prop 68, which will yield $4.1 billion in park bond funds in California. And there is a provision in that Park Bond Act that provides about $60 million to convert retired power plants to open space or parks. We tried to tell them to put Redondo Beach in parens there, but they wouldn't listen to Mayor Bill on that point. Prop 3 is on the ballot in about 4 weeks. That's another potential source, should it win. That's a large bond, almost $9 billion, for water remediation. There's other money out there, but the point is, if we're going to dictate, if you will, if we're going to accomplish what we want, whatever that is, because we have to go through that design iteration, we have to figure it out for ourselves. At some point, the credit card is going to have to come out, or the checkbook, and these are the sources that we think about that allow us to do it. And then what's the focus? I mean, it's a long journey. Most of the projects that Cosmont works on for the many cities and school districts and counties that we work with, they take 5, 7, 10 years. This process has already taken quite a long time just to start the conversation. Just to get started has taken us about 10 years. So what should a developer in a community focus on? These aren't all the considerations, but what you saw in the stories that Richard and Ben gave you were really imbued by all of these. What's going to be in the open space and public realm? What is the size and location of the park on the site? What are the amenities that we put in there? We saw extraordinary spaces, certainly in Millennium Park, amazing spaces. How do we get those? What about the private sector side? How does that integrate with the public sector side? What are the size and locations and the types of uses that best fit? Because I think at this point, if you ask this community, I think it's a worthwhile question. Are we building a private sector project to deliver, building a private sector project to deliver a park? Or are we installing a coastal regional park that can be supported by some sensitive aesthetic development? I think it's the latter. And I think in order to make that work, we have to figure out what it is that makes sense for us to approve as a community. And how do we program that space? How do we blend public and private spaces? What's the density? What's the height? And you heard Richard say this, quality and balance. Very important, because in these processes, you don't often get everything that you want, but if you come with the right purpose, if you figured out what's really going to work, and you found enough funding sources, you can really cut the transaction in a very beneficial way for the community. And then, of course, you have the process. The process here is pretty straightforward in the sense that it starts from the premise that this property is zoned park and public utility, and a public vote is required for any land use change. In land use parlance, that's sort of check and checkmate, because it gives us as a community the ability to stand tall and say, I think we can negotiate what we want. I know we can get it delivered. We're still going to have to figure out the funding. We're still going to have to figure out all the issues related to CEQA, Coastal Commission, wetlands restoration. We're still going to have to negotiate a design. We have to deal in good faith with the private sector who's going to make a major investment in the property and propose a project. And most importantly, we need to have a transparent, broad-based, and consistent public dialogue about what needs to go there and how it gets there. That's really the process. Those are the next steps. I think the world, and I think, Richard, you said, it's a world of economic development. We go from aesthetics to public purpose to infrastructure to public amenities. But as you can see from this collage, there are a lot of pieces to getting it right. But you have one opportunity to get it right. So I'm proud to say that I think we can do that in this community. I think the City Council and the Mayor are ready to do it. I can see that many of you are. It's going to be a very productive, at times confusing, but I think in the long run, a successful journey. Thank you.
Okay, with that, we were going to have a little Q&A, and they're out collecting the cards. Maybe, Sheila, just give me the cards you have right now, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, thanks. You guys are tough.
If you guys have some cards, maybe get them to the end of the aisle somehow, and
We'll work on some diagrams.
we'll start addressing them. Here, Sheila, I grab this. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Here's one. And again, folks, this is not a planning process, but it certainly always leads to that whenever we start talking about it. So the first one, are houses, et cetera, going to be built when the power lines come down? Won't this cause a lot of traffic? Well, let me answer that one. And it really just goes back to the fact that we're going to have a public vote on whatever happens. So a lot of people that I've spoken to are very afraid of what's going to happen either at the power plant or along the power lines in terms of development, because Redondo Beach is already 11,000 residents per square mile, and that's a big number. When I've talked to other developers and I tell them how dense we are, that gets their attention. I was just talking to a developer the other day who builds malls, and he thinks Redondo Beach is this tiny little beach community. And I told him, au contraire, we're 11,000 residents per square mile. He said, wow, that's a lot. So whatever happens, you know, this question kind of reflects a certain fear that something's going to happen that they don't have control of. You have to remember that there's going to be a public vote, and don't really know what's going to happen. I've had people say, I had a gentleman when I was campaigning say, Bill, you leave that power plant right where it is. It doesn't operate. It doesn't generate traffic, and I'm used to looking at it. So that would be one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is you build whatever you want, just get rid of that power plant. I don't care what happens. So that's why we're here, and that's why we're starting this process, and that's, you know, that question kind of speaks to a lot of things. Does having the public area and park in the center surrounded by private development enhance the value of the private portion? I guess maybe I could ask you that, Richard. Does having the public area and park in the center surrounded by private development enhance the value of the private portion?
Well, I don't know that you necessarily have to have it in the center. You're going to have it adjacent there. I would think any great public space is going to have a presence that belongs to everyone in the public way in the edges. It's very well documented that adjacent real estate values can increase. In Millennium Park's case, we're at about 25 to 30%. I think a baseline you'll read documented in the Trust for Public Land, or ULI, benchmarks it at about 15% and upward. So you are going to generate higher value property for folks that live around there. You're going to create higher levels of taxes that are collected for operation of the city. Businesses that tend to be around public open spaces are quicker to go to lease, so there's benefit there. So if the question's asking, is a public space only benefit adjacent private property owners? You know, that's not the case. I think the park benefits everyone, but land adjacent to that is going to increase in value, certainly not decrease.
Here's a basic question I hear a lot. What additional parking requirements will be required on new development so that our neighborhoods adjacent to this site are not impacted? So I guess maybe, Larry, you could answer that, how parking gets handled.
The interesting thing about parking is that it is at the coast. We are looking at different elements to get to the right answer. One is the Coastal Commission requires public access, and that's often reflected in a series of parking requirements of any project. Secondly, the private sector looks to install sufficient parking for any of the uses, and then that's why the blend and mix of uses becomes so important, because you have different peak hour trip periods for different kinds of uses, retail versus, let's say, office or versus residential. And then the third issue is that we just have a shift in how people are consuming and commuting. I mean, life is changing in a very dynamic digital world, and this is a piece of property, because it has contamination, that probably doesn't even get out on the development path in any significant way for 3 to 4 years. And then, you know, whatever period of time it takes to build it out in phases. So, you know, we're trying to solve for parking in possibly 10 years from now, and already we are seeing, I was just at a conference on Monday, the Bond Buyer Conference. We're a public finance shop, and so we had S&P and Moody's on a panel, and they're starting to figure out what models exist for auto ownership, and they're calling it mobility as a service. In other words, they're feeling that within 10 to 15 years, many folks will buy into a car as a service, but not own that car entirely. And most of those cars that they buy into will be autonomous, and they'll be moving back and forth without a driver. All of these are factors as to parking. And so I think parking is three things. It's a requirement for access at the coast. Secondly, it's a financial requirement in order to get the proper financing for any project, public or private. But third, it's an investment in the future that's changing rather quickly and will change as we move through this project. So the amount, type, and location of parking is not an easy answer, but it's one that needs to be a focus in that public-private dialogue.
Great. This one's probably for you, Mr. Feldman. Would any proposed project connect directly with the ocean beach, make a tidal wetland, and how would sea level rise affect what we end up doing there?
Yeah, it's a great question. We were just talking about the impact of sea level rise is fairly limited in and around Los Angeles communities. That said, you're on the ocean, so it'll impact this site. I think what's interesting is that opportunity being so proximate and having that historic feature of the Salt Lake as it was. Clearly, what we're talking about is a brackish water wetland where we have a mix of both freshwater and saltwater. The ability to really look to infrastructure and solving some of the flooding problems that may be in and around this area as well, and sort of use the park as a sponge. So it's going to take on a type of multi-beneficial role, and not only a park, but it's a piece of infrastructure. We're providing valuable habitat. We'll start seeing more and more different types of wildlife move into the area. How do you sort of set that up? And looking ahead, what does it mean when the sea level does potentially rise to 4, potentially 5 feet above what are the mean tides today? So that's planning for the future. We've looked at that on some of the other projects elsewhere out of the city of LA, but obviously it will be a factor in the planning of this site. So.
Great, thanks, Ben. Larry, here's another question for you. What lessons have you learned from the failed waterfront project that will help Redondo make this project successful? I think he's going to leave now. Mix them up. You got any comment, Larry, about anything we've learned, and I guess a lot of people.
I think there are two lessons, and I start out by saying that, and I said this earlier, that acquisition of entitlements at the coast is complicated, and it can't be accomplished without truly a broad and transparent public dialogue. And my sense is that at some point in the waterfront, the image of the application, or the image the application was trying to achieve, started to depart with what the image of the community was to a great extent. And I think on that basis, when everybody thinks of the waterfront as something they own and participate in, because it's a community asset, you just have to get it right. It's not an easy process. The other thing we learn is that it's a long, we know it's a long-term effort, and in the waterfront, the city owns the land, and long-term leases are complicated real estate projects, and without absolute support for those projects, they're easy, relatively easy and susceptible to challenge. And so getting back to the point of getting it right in the beginning, the dialogue between the community has to end up in a successful vision, because it really, coastal politics and coastal land use are a volatile cocktail.
Okay. Here's a good one. Is AES responsible for dismantling the plant and restoring the site for development? What is the price tag for buying the property? I guess I can answer that. AES has always said that they're responsible for remediating, demoing, and remediating the property. Before that, it was Southern California Edison. AES took it on, so whoever the new buyer is may take it on and do it themselves, or they may have AES do it. But ultimately, the property owner is responsible for remediating their site, and they'll be having to work closely with the DTSC and a lot of other agencies to, get it up to speed. There's a cost difference between remediating for a park and remediating for, commercial development or whatever goes there. So, yeah, it's been a big question for many, many years, and I think we're going to find out. I don't know if we'll ever actually find out a real number, but we are going to find out eventually. But it is the responsibility of the owner. So. What do we got? Let me find another good question. There's some good questions in here, folks. Thank you. I'll find one for you, Richard. Streets surrounding the AES property are already traffic-filled in peak week-long hours. How can this long-awaited renewal of the power plant site mitigate for this widening? How can the long-awaited renewal of the power plant site mitigate for this? Widening a PCH isn't really a practical solution. I don't know, Richard, maybe you guys had to deal with increased traffic concerns with adding the development you talked about.
Yeah, I really support Larry's discussion on the parking. There's no simple answer. I would observe that walking around the site, I think you have some great opportunities with the natural fall of the land. I think there are ways that you can think about creating new roads that could service development that would not put that burden on the existing perimeter roads that are there. I think there's opportunities to create new overlooks so you could kind of visually connect a view to the ocean and kind of have a new connection in that manner. And the other piece I think is very important is the use that you look at generally. I always hear that people are so concerned about residential impacts with cars, and they're real. But then people want to go with office, and the reality is kind of office, workplace kinds of uses. People are coming and going at the same time in the morning and the days, and that actually puts a strain. Where residential lets cars flow kind of at their will across all hours of the day. So I don't know, it's one or other. You're going to have a discussion about the land uses, that mix of traffic generation. You're going to be very smart about introducing new streets and drives to get all of that surface and entry, like get a hotel, get that off of your main streets visible. So you can't let it stop you. You have to be smart and figure it out. And I know you will. The good thing is you've got a workable size parcel here. You've got very functioning streets on the entire perimeter, and I can't imagine why you couldn't work it out.
Just to add on to that, working on the PU backyard, we actually reached out to Metro about that site because there's a lot of pressure, and seriously discussed an option for what would be an extension of the Gold Line. So transit is definitely something of a powerful asset. I think the red car looked pretty good on the coast. Maybe there's a way to kind of fold that back in. But Clearly, the future of transportation has got a very big open horizon, I think, in terms of what the possibilities are.
You learn so much when you start immersing yourself in this, and you look at the history of it. And I was looking at the map of the previous red car line and the Pacific Railway all throughout LA County. It's just amazing what we had. And then you look at what we're just trying to create by 2048, and it's not even as good as what we had. So the other thing I've learned as we talk about these land use issues and how Redondo Beach fits into all this, and we're in the middle of a general plan update right now. I forgot how many community members, maybe 30, are meeting regularly, been meeting for over a year. And one of the things they learned is that 93% of Redondo residents leave town in the morning to go to work. And that's a really high number. And that's an independent study. And I think we all feel that, right? You just drive down PCH in the morning, north or south in the afternoon. And so what we've learned from other communities ultimately is that by citing office space in our area, you could take some of the load off of people leaving town and not having to drive so far, and the load that it creates is going opposite traffic with people coming in. So these are just the kind of nuances of Redondo Beach when you look at things in a larger context like what Richard was talking about, where residential will spread it all out. But we've already got so many people leaving town that you'd want to reverse some of that flow and keep people out of the transportation corridor, if you can.
And even those kind of uses with parks are good, because I think, and Larry mentioned kind of managing the peak loads of when people are coming and going and using, so you can share parking that location. Even the shared mobility, so that's what everyone's talking about, is there won't be fewer cars on the road, but there will be fewer people owning cars, which means you have on-demand, but they kind of need a home base and a place to dock. And where we're seeing that is in new centralized parking facilities, often embedded in things like parkland, and you're adjacent to the waterfront, so I don't know if that generates a lot of vehicle trips to get out to the water, but I would just think that there would be a strategic role that this piece of property plays to manage all of those changing dynamics, to service the development, service kind of shifts in mobility, to provide enhanced access perhaps to the waterfront even, or take some of that demand that's on there today. You have to use it to your benefit.
Here's one maybe for you, Ben. What about Surf City wave pools? What about covered from sun Roman bath that functions as event space and pool away from emissions? What is max building height and depth of parking lot for that location maximum? And what about parks, gardens, et cetera, on roofs? So I guess really, Ben, maybe I've heard that a lot. What about a wave pool? And what about parks, gardens, et cetera, on roofs? I mean, what are some of these elements you could work in and how?
Clearly, in the modern era, there's a lot of incredible things that architecture and design can do and afford. From a new park space in Malaysia on the top of a 30-story building to the Millennium Park is such a feat. The High Line in New York is a great example of reusing old infrastructure. So I think there is no limit. There is no don't even think about that. I think when the time comes for all of you to chip in and provide your ideas, I think the bigger, crazier ideas, the better. I think surfing, you got the beach. No. But hey, to have a wave pool isn't such a crazy idea. I think when you dig deep on this site, though, expect to find water. So maybe there is a limit.
Yeah, I've got a lot of questions about individual uses here, and I'm sure this one's from Hermosa Beach. Is there any reason not to consider including the water infiltration project currently be considered in Hermosa? And for those of you who don't know, there's a water infiltration project under consideration in Hermosa Beach, right on the greenbelt there, and the neighbors and the residents who live there are very upset about it. It's big. The construction area is going to be big anyway, and it's going to take a couple of years, and they're none too happy. It's right on their little park strip, right on the edge of Redondo Beach. And the reason it's there is because Redondo Drain comes down there, and it's a major, major stormwater flow. And so it really would be a great project to capture that initial stormwater runoff from going into the ocean. But like any of these projects, they can cause a lot of community pushback. And yeah, I think they got way, way down the road before they really checked with the community. So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people have always thought that you could have, there's a wetland there on the AS site, and down the road, if you actually built a urban constructed wetland, then yeah, you could. But there's so many elements into it, and I'm not an expert at it. So, and that's a regional project that several cities have agreed to. It's going to be interesting. Here's another question about an aquatic center. Is that on the table? This will help bring in revenue for the city. Aquatic center is absolutely something that the community will have to work through, and with all the other ideas that come through, yeah. Other than hotels, what are often private funding options that can be discussed for consideration? I guess that's a good one for you, Larry.
There are two considerations, I think, in terms of private development. One is certainly what will the market support. In a coastal spot like we are looking at, hotels are clearly a favored nation among developers, especially when you have a track record, as we do, of hotel trips and patronage. Retail is a very dynamic set of circumstances we're seeing at the Galleria and other places where the momentum of retail is really mixed because the delivery of retail is changing, and Amazon has changed that equation significantly. But the coast and the blend of retail make that product somewhat different, somewhat distinctive. It's sports-oriented, it's active-oriented. Food is a significant factor.